A black boy named Jamal went to the police station screaming, "Arrest my mom." What desperate situation could make a child turn against the person he loves most? And what will the police uncover that will shock everyone? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Jamal's eyes fluttered open as the first rays of sunlight peeked through his bedroom curtains. He yawned and stretched, his young body still yearning for more sleep. But he knew he had to get up. His mom, Angela, would be leaving for work soon, and he wanted to spend a few precious moments with her before she left. As he padded into the kitchen, the smell of toast and eggs filled the air. There stood Angela, her back to him as she bustled around the small kitchen. Even from behind, Jamal could see the slump in her shoulders and the slight tremor in her hands as she reached for a plate. "Morning, Mom," Jamal said softly, not wanting to startle her. Angela turned, a tired smile spreading across her face. "Good morning, sweetheart. You're up early." Jamal's heart squeezed as he took in his mother's appearance. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her normally neat hair was hastily pulled back into a messy ponytail. She looked so tired, so worn down. "I wanted to see you before you left," Jamal explained, sliding into a chair at the small kitchen table. Angela's smile widened, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's sweet of you, honey. I'm sorry I won't be home until late tonight. Double shift, you know." Jamal nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He knew all too well about the long hours his mom worked. She was always working, always trying to make ends meet for the two of them. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked, unable to keep the worry from his voice. "You look really tired." Angela waved her hand dismissively as she set a plate of eggs and toast in front of him. "Oh, I'm fine, sweetie. Just a bit sleepy, that's all. Nothing a good cup of coffee won't fix." But Jamal wasn't convinced. He watched as his mom's hand shook slightly while pouring her coffee, how she had to blink hard a few times as if to clear her vision. "Maybe you should take a day off," Jamal suggested carefully. "You've been working so much lately." Angela's face softened as she sat down across from him. "Oh, Jamal, you're such a thoughtful boy, but we need the money, and people at the hospital need me. I'll be fine, I promise." Jamal picked at his eggs, his appetite suddenly gone. He knew his mom was trying to reassure him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The sight of her exhausted face and trembling hands filled him with a deep, gnawing worry. As Angela stood to grab her bag, Jamal felt a sudden urge to hug her tightly and never let go. Instead, he watched her gather her things, his young heart heavy with concern for the woman who sacrificed so much for him. As Jamal and Angela settled at the small kitchen table, the boy's worried eyes never left his mother's face. He pushed his scrambled eggs around his plate, his mind racing with ways to help her. "So, Mom," Jamal began, trying to sound casual, "how's work been lately? Any interesting patients?" Angela looked up from her toast, blinking as if coming out of a daze. "Oh, work's been busy," she replied, her voice lacking its usual enthusiasm. "You know, same old, same old." Jamal nodded, noticing how his mom's gaze seemed unfocused. He pressed on, determined to keep her engaged. "I've got a big math test coming up next week. Maybe we could study together this weekend?" Angela's eyes widened slightly as if suddenly remembering something. "Oh, that's right, your test." She rubbed her forehead, looking confused. "This weekend, I think I'm working, honey. I'm sorry." Jamal's heart sank. His mom never forgot about his tests before. He watched as she took a sip of coffee, her hand trembling slightly as she set the mug down. "That's okay, Mom," he said softly, trying to hide his disappointment. "I understand." Angela attempted a smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "You're such a good boy, Jamal. I promise we'll do something fun soon, okay?" Jamal nodded, but the knot in his stomach tightened. His mom's words, usually so warm and reassuring, sounded hollow and distant. He noticed how she kept blinking hard, as if struggling to stay awake. "Mom, are you sure you're feeling all right?" Jamal asked, unable to hide the concern in his voice. Angela straightened up, making a visible effort to appear more alert. Of course, sweetie. Just a bit tired, that's all. Nothing to worry about. But Jamal could see through her brave face. The dark circles under her eyes, the slump in her shoulders, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It all painted a picture of exhaustion that went beyond a simple lack of sleep. As they finished their breakfast in silence, Jamal's worry deepened. He wished he could do more to help, to ease the burden that weighed so heavily on his mom's shoulders. But for now, all he could do was watch and worry, his young heart heavy with concern for the woman who gave so much and asked for so little in return. As Angela hurried to get ready for work, Jamal watched her from the doorway of her bedroom. She moved with a sluggish urgency, fumbling with buttons and dropping things as she rushed to dress in her nurse's uniform. "Mom, let me help you," Jamal offered, stepping forward to pick up a fallen hairbrush. Angela paused, giving him a tired smile. "That's sweet of you, honey, but I've got this. You should be getting ready for school." Jamal hesitated, then spoke up again. "I could do some chores around the house today. Maybe clean up the living room or do some laundry?" His mother's eyes softened with affection, but she shook her head. No, you focus on your studies. That's the most important thing right now." As Angela turned back to the mirror, trying to tame her unruly hair, Jamal noticed how her hands trembled slightly. His stomach twisted with worry. He'd never seen his mom like this before, so drained and unfocused. "Are you sure you're okay to go to work?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. Angela met his gaze in the mirror, forcing a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, sweetie. It's just a long shift, that's all. I'll be fine once I get there and have my second cup of coffee." Jamal nodded, unconvinced. He watched as his mom gathered her things, her movements slow and clumsy. She nearly forgot her ID badge, only remembering when Jamal pointed it out. As they headed for the front door, Jamal's mind raced. He had to do something to help his mom, but what? She always insisted on doing everything herself, never wanting to burden him with adult responsibilities. "Have a good day at school, honey," Angela said, giving him a quick hug. "I love you." "Love you too, Mom," Jamal replied, hugging her tightly. He didn't want to let go, afraid she might collapse the moment he released her. As Angela walked to her car, Jamal stood in the doorway, his heart heavy with concern. He made a silent promise to himself. He would find a way to help his mom, to make her rest and take care of herself. He just needed to figure out how. As Angela gathered her things to leave, Jamal watched her with growing unease. His mom's movements were slow and unsteady, her usual grace replaced by a worrying clumsiness. Just as she was about to head out the door, Angela stumbled slightly, her hand shooting out to grab the kitchen counter for support. "Mom!" Jamal cried out, rushing to her side. "Are you okay?" Angela blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear her vision. She forced a smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "I'm fine, honey. Just a little tired, that's all." Jamal's heart raced as he watched his mother struggle to regain her composure. He'd never seen her like this before, and it scared him. "Maybe you should really stay home today," he suggested, his voice trembling slightly. "Oh, sweetie, I can't do that, right?" Angela replied, patting his cheek gently. "As I've said, there are patients counting on me. I'll be okay once I get to work and have some coffee." Jamal wanted to argue, to beg her to rest, but he knew how stubborn his mom could be. She always put others first, even when it meant pushing herself to the brink of exhaustion. As Angela made her way to the front door, Jamal followed close behind, ready to catch her if she stumbled again. He watched helplessly as she fumbled with her keys, dropping them twice before managing to unlock the door. As Angela's car disappeared down the street, Jamal closed the front door, leaning against it with a heavy sigh. He'd never felt so powerless in his life. Jamal sat in his classroom, his eyes fixed on the whiteboard, but his mind was far away. The teacher's voice faded into the background as images of his mom's tired face and unsteady steps filled his thoughts. He couldn't shake the worry that gnawed at his insides. What if she collapsed at work? What if she got into an accident because she was too tired to drive safely? These thoughts swirled in Jamal's head, making it impossible to focus on his math problems. When the lunch bell rang, Jamal barely noticed. He mechanically packed up his books and shuffled towards the cafeteria. His best friend, Marcus, caught up with him in the hallway. "Hey man, what's up?" Marcus asked cheerfully, but his smile faded when he saw Jamal's troubled expression. "You okay?" Jamal shrugged, not sure how to put his worries into words. They grabbed their lunch trays and found a quiet corner to sit. "It's my mom," Jamal finally said, pushing his food around with his fork. "She's working so hard and I'm really worried about her." Marcus listened as Jamal poured out his fears. He told him about how tired Angela looked that morning, how she'd stumbled and seemed so out of it. "That sounds serious," Marcus said, his brow furrowed with concern. "Have you talked to anyone about this?" Jamal shook his head. "Who would I talk to? It's just me and Mom at home." Marcus thought for a moment. "What about a teacher or the school counselor? They might know how to help." The idea hadn't occurred to Jamal before. He chewed his lip, considering it. "I don't know. What if they think I'm overreacting? Or what if they call my mom and she gets upset?" "But what if they can actually help?" Marcus countered. "It's worth a try, isn't it? Your mom's health is important." Jamal nodded slowly. His friend had a point, but the thought of talking to an adult about his family's problems made him nervous. Who could he trust? Would they really understand? As the lunch period came to an end, Jamal still felt uncertain. He knew he needed to do something, but taking that first step seemed so daunting. Jamal stepped into the quiet house, the silence enveloping him like a heavy blanket. He dropped his backpack by the door and stood there for a moment, listening. The tick of the clock on the wall seemed unnaturally loud in the empty space. "Mom?" he called out, even though he knew she wouldn't be home yet. Her shift wouldn't end for hours. With a sigh, Jamal trudged to the kitchen. He opened the fridge, staring blankly at its contents before closing it again. He wasn't hungry. The worry that had been gnawing at him all day seemed to have taken up all the space in his stomach. Trying to shake off the uneasy feeling, Jamal settled at the kitchen table with his homework. He opened his math textbook, determined to focus on the problems in front of him. But after reading the same question 3 times without understanding it, he gave up. His mind kept drifting back to his mom. Was she okay? What if she had gotten dizzy again at work? What if she had fainted and no one had noticed? Jamal glanced at the clock. 4:30 p.m. Angela wouldn't be home until after 11. The thought of those long hours stretched out before him made Jamal's chest tighten with anxiety. He got up and paced around the living room, trying to calm his racing thoughts. But everywhere he looked, he saw reminders of his mom, her favorite mug on the coffee table, her sweater draped over the back of a chair. Each item seemed to mock him, highlighting her absence and fueling his fears. As the evening wore on, Jamal's imagination ran wild. He pictured Angela collapsing in a hospital hallway, too exhausted to call for help. He imagined her falling asleep at the wheel on her drive home, her car veering off the road. Each scenario was more terrifying than the last, and Jamal felt powerless to stop them from playing out in his mind. He tried watching TV but couldn't focus on the show. He attempted to read a book, but the words blurred together on the page. Even his usual video games couldn't hold his attention. The house felt too big, too empty, and the silence was deafening. As night fell, Jamal sat on the living room couch, his eyes glued to the front door. The TV droned on in the background, but he wasn't really watching it. His phone lay on the coffee table, silent and still. He kept willing it to buzz with a message from his mom, but it remained stubbornly quiet. Just as Jamal was considering calling the hospital to check on Angela, his phone lit up. His heart leaped as he snatched it up, fumbling in his haste to read the message. "Working late tonight, honey. Don't wait up. Love you." Jamal's shoulders sagged with a mix of relief and disappointment. At least she was okay, but the thought of her working even longer hours made his stomach churn with worry. He typed back quickly, "Okay, Mom, love you too. Please be careful." Jamal tried to follow his mom's advice and go to bed, but sleep eluded him. He tossed and turned, his sheets tangling around his legs as his mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Angela's exhausted face from that morning, the way she had stumbled in the kitchen. The digital clock on his nightstand seemed to mock him, its red numbers slowly ticking away the hours. As the night wore on, Jamal's worry transformed into a gnawing fear. What if something had happened after she sent that text? What if she had collapsed at work and no one had noticed? By 3 a.m., Jamal had made up his mind. If Angela wasn't home by morning, he would go to the police station. They would know what to do, how to find her. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something, and having even a small course of action helped calm his frayed nerves a little. Still, sleep remained elusive. Jamal lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening for the sound of Angela's car in the driveway, the jingle of her keys in the lock. But the house remained silent, and the night stretched on endlessly. As the first rays of sunlight crept through Jamal's window, he heard the faint creak of the front door. His eyes snapped open, heart leaping with relief. Angela was finally home. Jamal lay still for a moment, expecting to hear his mom's footsteps on the stairs, but the house remained eerily quiet. Frowning, he pushed back his covers and swung his legs out of bed. "Mom?" he called out, padding into the hallway. No answer came. A chill ran down Jamal's spine as he made his way towards the kitchen. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. Something wasn't right. "Mom?" he called again, his voice shaking slightly. "Are you okay?" As Jamal rounded the corner into the kitchen, his world came to a screeching halt. There, sprawled on the cold tile floor, lay Angela. She wasn't moving. For a split second, Jamal froze, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, he sprang into action. Without even pausing to put on shoes, he bolted out of the house. The cool morning air bit at his skin as Jamal sprinted down the quiet streets. His bare feet slapped against the pavement, but he barely noticed the discomfort. His entire being was focused on one thing: getting help for his mom. Jamal's lungs burned as he ran, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. Tears blurred his vision, but he blinked them away furiously. He couldn't afford to slow down, not even for a second. As he raced towards the police station, Jamal's mind whirled with fear and panic. What if he was too late? What if Angela was... No, he couldn't think like that. He had to stay focused, had to keep running. Jamal burst through the doors of the police station, his chest heaving and his bare feet leaving small, damp prints on the linoleum floor. The sudden commotion startled the officers inside, causing them to jump to their feet and rush towards the frantic boy. "What's wrong, son?" one of the officers asked, concern etched on his face as he knelt down to Jamal's level. Gasping for air, Jamal's words tumbled out in a rush. "Please, you have to arrest my mom." The officers exchanged bewildered glances, clearly taken aback by the unexpected request. Confusion filled the air as they tried to make sense of Jamal's plea. "Slow down, buddy," another officer said gently. "Take a deep breath and tell us what's going on." Jamal gulped in air, his eyes wide with fear and desperation. "My mom, she's on the floor, not moving. Please, you have to come." Understanding dawned on the officers' faces as they realized the gravity of the situation. The first officer squeezed Jamal's shoulder reassuringly. "We're not going to arrest your mom, but we'll certainly help her. Can you show us where she is?" Jamal nodded vigorously, relief washing over him as he saw the officers spring into action. One of them grabbed a first aid kit, while another radioed for an ambulance. "Lead the way, son," the first officer said, his voice calm but urgent. Without hesitation, Jamal turned and bolted out of the station, the officers close on his heels. As they ran through the quiet morning streets, Jamal's heart pounded with a mix of fear and hope. He prayed they weren't too late. The small group rounded the corner onto Jamal's street, their footsteps echoing in the still air. Jamal pointed to his house, his voice cracking as he cried out, "There! She's in there!" The officers quickened their pace, their training kicking in as they approached the open front door. Jamal's bare feet slapped against the pavement, his eyes fixed on the entrance to his home, silently willing his mom to be okay. The police cruiser sped through the quiet streets, its lights flashing but sirens silent in the early morning calm. Jamal sat in the back seat, his small hands clasped tightly together, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The two officers in the front exchanged worried glances as they drove. "What do you think we're walking into, Mike?" the officer in the passenger seat asked in a low voice. Officer Mike shook his head, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "I'm not sure, John. Could be anything from a medical emergency to... Well, let's not jump to conclusions." Officer John nodded, his brow furrowed with concern. "The poor kid seems terrified. I hope his mom's okay." In the back seat, Jamal could hear their hushed conversation. His heart raced, and he squeezed his eyes shut, whispering a silent prayer. "Please, God, let Mom be all right. Please let us get there in time." The car turned onto Jamal's street and he leaned forward, pointing urgently. "There, that's our house." Officer Mike pulled the cruiser to a quick stop in front of the modest home. Before the car had fully stopped, Jamal was already fumbling with the door handle, ready to bolt out. "Hold on, son," Officer John said, turning to face him. "We need to go in first, okay? Stay behind us." Jamal nodded, his face a mixture of fear and impatience. As soon as the doors opened, he was out of the car, bouncing on his toes as he waited for the officers to lead the way. The trio approached the front door, which stood slightly ajar. Officer Mike pushed it open gently, calling out, "Police? Is anyone here?" As they approached Jamal's house, the officers noticed the door slightly ajar. Their hearts pounded as they cautiously drew their weapons, signaling to each other to be ready for anything. Jamal rushed ahead, urging them to follow. The officers slowly pushed the door open, the creak of the hinges echoing through the eerily quiet home. "Mom!" Jamal called out, his voice trembling with fear and hope. He tried to dart past the officers, but Officer John gently held him back. "Stay behind us, Jamal," Officer Mike whispered, his eyes scanning the dimly lit entryway. "We need to make sure it's safe first." The officers moved forward, their footsteps careful and measured. The living room was empty, the morning light casting long shadows across the worn furniture. Jamal's eyes darted around, searching for any sign of his mother. As they approached the kitchen, Officer Mike held up his hand, signaling them to stop. He had spotted something on the floor just beyond the doorway. There, on the cold tile floor, lay Angela. Her body was limp, sprawled out in an unnatural position. The color had drained from her face, leaving her skin ashen and pale. The officers felt a jolt of fear course through them at the sight. Jamal's eyes widened in horror. "Mom!" he cried out, pushing past the officers to rush to Angela's side. He fell to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as he reached out to touch her arm. "Mom, can you hear me? Please wake up." But Angela didn't respond. Her eyes remained closed, her chest rising and falling in shallow. Jamal's voice grew more frantic with each passing second. "Mom, please. It's me, Jamal. You've got to wake up." Officer Mike quickly knelt down on Angela's other side, checking her pulse. "It's weak, but it's there," he reported, his voice tight with concern. "We need to get her to a hospital fast." Jamal couldn't tear his eyes away from his mother's face. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he clutched her hand, willing her to open her eyes. "Mom, please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I need you. You can't leave me." The officers exchanged worried glances over Jamal's head. They knew time was of the essence, but they also understood the boy's desperate need to be close to his mother. Jamal hovered nearby, his hands trembling as he watched the officer tend to his mother. Tears welled up in his eyes, threatening to spill over at any moment. The officers quickly assessed the situation, their trained eyes scanning the scene. Officer John knelt beside Angela, checking her vital signs while Officer Mike stood nearby, his hand on his radio. "This isn't a crime scene," Officer John said, his voice filled with concern. "It's a medical emergency. She's completely exhausted." The realization hit them like a wave. Jamal's desperate plea at the station wasn't about criminality. It was a cry for help to save his mother. Angela's body had finally given in, shutting down from sheer overwork and neglect. Officer Mike's eyes widened with understanding. "My God," he muttered, She's worked herself to the bone. Without hesitation, Officer Mike grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Mike. We need an ambulance at 1542 Maple Street immediately. We have an unconscious woman, possible collapse due to extreme exhaustion." As Officer Mike relayed the details to dispatch, Officer John turned to Jamal, who was still clutching his mother's hand, tears streaming down his face. "Jamal," Officer John said gently, placing a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did the right thing coming to us. Help is on the way." Jamal looked up at the officer, his eyes filled with fear and hope. Is she going to be okay?" Officer John squeezed Jamal's shoulder. "We're doing everything we can. The paramedics will be here soon." The minutes seemed to stretch on endlessly as they waited for help to arrive. Jamal couldn't tear his eyes away from his mother's pale face. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Mom, please wake up," he pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. Officer John placed a comforting hand on Jamal's shoulder. "You are a brave boy. Getting help so quickly might have saved your mom's life." Jamal nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He felt a mix of relief and fear washing over him in waves. Relief that help was on the way, but fear of what might happen next. The ambulance screeched to a halt outside Jamal's house, its flashing lights painting the quiet street in a frantic red and white. 2 paramedics burst through the front door, their movements quick and purposeful. They rushed into the kitchen where Angela lay motionless on the floor. Jamal stood frozen, his eyes wide with shock as he watched the paramedics work. Their voices were calm but urgent as they called out medical terms he didn't understand. One paramedic placed an oxygen mask over Angela's face, while the other checked her vital signs. "BP's dangerously low," one of them said. "We need to stabilize her for transport." Officer Mike placed a gentle hand on Jamal's shoulder, guiding him a few steps back to give the paramedics more room. "They're doing everything they can for your mom, Jamal," he said softly. Jamal nodded, unable to speak. His eyes never left his mother's pale face as the paramedics worked to stabilize her. They attached monitors and inserted an IV, their movements swift and practiced. After what felt like an eternity but was only a few minutes, one of the paramedics looked up. "We're ready to move her. Let's get her on the stretcher." With careful precision, they lifted Angela onto the stretcher, securing her for the journey to the hospital. As they wheeled her out of the house, Officer John turned to Jamal. "You can ride in the ambulance with your mom," he said, his voice gentle. "I'll be right behind you in the patrol car." Jamal climbed into the back of the ambulance, his legs shaky as he sat down next to his mother. The paramedic in the back with them offered a reassuring smile. "We're going to take good care of her," she said, adjusting one of the monitors. As the ambulance sped through the streets, sirens wailing, Jamal held onto his mother's hand. The ride was a blur of flashing lights and sharp turns. Jamal's mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. He watched the paramedic closely, looking for any sign of hope in her face as she monitored Angela's vitals. The hospital's automatic doors slid open with a whoosh as the paramedics rushed Angela's stretcher through. Jamal trailed behind, his bare feet slapping against the cold linoleum floor. The bright fluorescent lights of the emergency room made him squint after the darkness of the night. 12-year-old male accompanying, one of the paramedics called out. Mother, mid-30s, severe exhaustion, and possible malnutrition. A team of doctors and nurses swarmed around Angela, their voices overlapping as they fired questions and commands at each other. Jamal tried to keep up, but a kind-faced nurse gently steered him away. "You need to wait out here, sweetie," she said softly. "We'll take good care of your mom, I promise." Jamal found himself alone in the waiting area, the sounds of the emergency room fading to a distant hum. He sank into an uncomfortable plastic chair, his legs suddenly feeling like jelly. The events of the morning played on a loop in his mind. Finding Angela on the floor, running to the police station, the frantic ambulance ride. It all felt like a bad dream. Minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. Jamal's eyes darted between the clock on the wall and the double doors leading to the emergency room. Every time they swung open, his heart leaped, hoping for news about his mom. But each time, it was for someone else. He hugged his knees to his chest, trying to make himself as small as possible in the big, empty waiting room. Guilt gnawed at his insides. Why hadn't he noticed sooner how bad things had gotten? Why hadn't he done something to help? After what felt like an eternity, the doors swung open again. This time, a nurse in blue scrubs walked straight towards Jamal. Her face was kind, but serious. "Are you Angela's son?" she asked gently. Jamal nodded, his throat too tight to speak. The nurse sat down next to him, her voice soft but clear. "Your mom is suffering from extreme exhaustion and malnutrition," she explained. "She's been working herself too hard and not taking care of her own needs." Jamal's eyes filled with tears. He should have known. He should have done something sooner. Minutes later, the automatic doors of the hospital slid open, and two uniformed officers stepped into the bustling emergency room. Their eyes scanned the waiting area until they spotted Jamal, hunched over in a plastic chair, his face etched with worry. Officer Mike and Officer John approached him quietly, their expressions softening as they drew near. "Hey there, Jamal," Officer Mike said gently, crouching down to meet the boy's eyes. "How are you holding up?" Jamal looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and weary. He shrugged, unable to find the words to express the turmoil inside him. Officer John pulled up a chair next to Jamal, while Officer Mike sat on his other side. They created a protective circle around the young boy, shielding him from the chaos of the emergency room. "We wanted to check on you and your mom," Officer John explained, her voice warm and comforting. "Have the doctors told you anything yet?" Jamal nodded slowly. "They said she's really tired and hasn't been eating right," he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. Officer Mike placed a reassuring hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Jamal, we need you to understand something important," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "What happened to your mom? It's not your fault." Jamal's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise and disbelief. Officer John leaned in, her voice filled with compassion. "Your mom loves you very much, Jamal. Sometimes when people love someone, they push themselves too hard trying to take care of them. That's what your mom did." "But," Jamal's voice cracked, "I should have noticed. I should have done something sooner." Officer Mike shook his head. "You're just a kid, Jamal. It's not your job to take care of your mom. You did the right thing by getting help when you realized something was wrong." As the officers continued to offer words of comfort and support, Jamal listened intently. He wanted to believe them, to let go of the guilt that had been eating away at him. But the weight of responsibility still pressed heavily on his young shoulders. As the sun began to peek through the hospital windows, casting a soft glow across the sterile hallways, a nurse approached Jamal with a gentle smile. "Your mother's been moved to a room now. You can go see her if you'd like," she said, her voice warm and comforting. Jamal's heart raced as he followed the nurse down the corridor. He'd been waiting for this moment all night, but now that it was here, he felt a mix of relief and fear. What would he see when he walked into that room? The nurse paused at a door, gesturing for Jamal to enter. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines. Angela lay in the hospital bed, her eyes closed and her face pale. She looked so small and fragile, nothing like the strong, tireless mother Jamal was used to seeing. Jamal's breath caught in his throat. Seeing his mom like this, vulnerable and weak, was almost more than he could bear. He stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the sight. Slowly, he made his way to the side of the bed. Angela's hand rested on top of the blanket, and Jamal reached out to hold it. Her skin felt cool against his palm, and he gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm here." Angela's eyes fluttered open, and a weak smile spread across her face when she saw Jamal. "Hey, baby," she murmured, her voice hoarse. Tears welled up in Jamal's eyes. He blinked them back, determined to be strong for his mom. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "I'm okay," Angela replied, but Jamal could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Jamal's grip on her hand tightened. "Mom, I promise I'm going to help you get better," he said, his voice filled with determination. and I'm going to make sure you never have to work so hard again. We'll figure it out together, okay?" Angela's eyes glistened with tears. "Oh, Jamal," she whispered. "You're such a good boy. But you don't have to worry about me. That's not your job." Jamal sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, watching his mother's chest rise and fall with each breath. Angela had fallen asleep again, her body finally getting the rest it so desperately needed. As the rhythmic beeping of the machines filled the room, Jamal's mind wandered, replaying the events of the past few days. He thought about how tired Angela had looked that morning, making breakfast before her double shift. He remembered the way she had stumbled in the kitchen, brushing off his concerns with a weak smile. The image of her lying motionless on the floor flashed through his mind, making his heart clench with fear even now. For the first time, Jamal truly understood the weight of the sacrifices his mother had been making for him. All those long shifts, the endless hours of work, the skipped meals, it had all been for him. Angela had pushed herself to the brink of collapse, all to give him a better life. Tears welled up in Jamal's eyes as guilt washed over him. How had he not seen it sooner? How had he missed the signs of his mother's exhaustion? He had been so caught up in his own life, his school, his friends, that he hadn't fully grasped the toll it was taking on Angela. As he watched his mother sleep, Jamal made a silent promise. He would be more aware of Angela's needs from now on. He would make sure she took breaks, ate proper meals, and got enough rest. No more would he let her push herself to the point of collapse. But his thoughts didn't stop there. Jamal began to wonder about other families in similar situations. How many other single parents were out there, working themselves to the bone for their children? How many kids like him were unaware of the sacrifices being made for them? A determination began to grow in Jamal's heart. He wanted to help others, to make sure no other family had to go through what he and Angela had experienced. Maybe he could start a support group at school, or volunteer at a community center. There had to be a way to raise awareness and provide assistance to those who needed it most. For the next few days, Angela remained in the hospital, her body slowly regaining its strength. Jamal visited her every day after school, his backpack filled with small gifts and stories from home. Each visit brought a little more light back into Angela's tired eyes. On his first visit, Jamal brought a hand-drawn card, filled with colorful hearts, and a message that made Angela's eyes well up with tears. "Get well soon, Mom. I love you more than you know," it read. Angela held the card close to her heart, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. The next day, Jamal arrived with a small potted plant. "To brighten up your room," he explained, placing it on the windowsill. Angela smiled, touched by her son's thoughtfulness. As the days passed, Jamal shared stories about what was happening at home and school. He told Angela about how their neighbors had offered to help with meals and housework, and how his teachers had sent their best wishes. With each story, Angela felt a little stronger, buoyed by the knowledge that their community cared. The officers who had helped them that fateful night also stopped by to check in. Officer John brought a bouquet of cheerful daisies, while Officer Mike came with a stack of magazines to help pass the time. Their visits were brief but meaningful, reminding both Angela and Jamal that they weren't alone. "You've got a great kid here, Angela," Officer Mike said during one visit, ruffling Jamal's hair affectionately. "He's been so brave through all of this." Angela reached out to squeeze Jamal's hand, her eyes shining with pride and love. "I know," she said softly. "I'm so lucky to have him." As the days went by, Jamal began to feel a sense of hope growing within him. He realized that they weren't alone in this struggle. Help was available when they needed it, whether from kind neighbors, understanding teachers, or compassionate police officers. The world suddenly seemed a little brighter, a little kinder than before. As Angela's condition improved day by day, her hospital room became a hub of unexpected activity. Nurses and doctors who had been caring for her stopped by more frequently, not just to check her vitals, but to chat and offer words of encouragement. Their genuine concern touched Angela deeply. One afternoon, Officer John and Officer Mike visited again, this time bringing a colorful "Get Well Soon" balloon. The whole precinct is rooting for you, Angela, Officer Mike said with a warm smile. Angela felt a lump in her throat, overwhelmed by their kindness. Word of Angela's situation had spread through the neighborhood, and soon a steady stream of familiar faces began to appear at her door. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door brought homemade chicken soup, its comforting aroma filling the room. Mr. Chen from the corner store stopped by with a beautiful orchid plant, explaining how it symbolized strength and resilience in his culture. Even Angela's co-workers from the hospital made time to visit, bringing with them stories of patients asking about her and sending their well wishes. Each visitor left Angela feeling more cherished and supported than she had ever imagined possible. As she sat in her hospital bed, surrounded by flowers, cards, and small gifts, Angela felt a profound shift in her perspective. She looked at Jamal, who had barely left her side, and saw the worry and love etched on his young face. It dawned on her just how much her son and the community around her cared about her well-being. This realization prompted Angela to reflect deeply on how she had been living her life. She had always put others first, working long hours and neglecting her own needs. But now, seeing the impact her collapse had on Jamal, and feeling the outpouring of support from others, she understood that taking care of herself was not selfish. It was necessary. Angela began to contemplate the changes she needed to make. She thought about setting boundaries at work, asking for help when she needed it, and making time for rest and self-care. The idea of putting herself first felt foreign and almost uncomfortable, but she knew it was essential for both her and Jamal's sake. As the afternoon sun cast a warm glow through the hospital room window, Angela and Jamal found themselves alone for the first time since her collapse. The room was quiet, save for the gentle hum of medical equipment. Angela patted the edge of her bed, inviting Jamal to sit closer. "Jamal, honey," Angela began, her voice soft and filled with emotion. "I think it's time we talked about what happened." Jamal nodded, his eyes welling up with tears. "Mom, I was so scared," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I thought I was going to lose you." Angela reached out and took Jamal's hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm so sorry, baby. I never meant to put you through that." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I've been so focused on making sure you had everything you needed, food, clothes, a roof over your head, that I forgot about taking care of myself." Jamal looked up at his mother, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and concern. "But Mom, I need you more than anything else. I want you to be healthy and happy." Angela felt a tear roll down her cheek. "Oh, Jamal, you're so wise for your age. You're right, and I see that now. I've been working so hard to provide for you that I didn't realize how much I was neglecting my own health." "I tried to tell you," Jamal said softly. "I noticed how tired you were, but you always said you were fine." Angela nodded, a look of regret crossing her face. "I know, sweetie. I thought I had to be strong all the time, but that wasn't fair to either of us." They sat in silence for a moment, both processing the weight of their words. Then Jamal spoke up, his voice filled with determination. "We need to find a better way, Mom. I want to help more around the house, and maybe you can work less?" Angela smiled, feeling a surge of pride for her thoughtful son. "That's a great idea, Jamal. We'll figure it out together. I promise I'll start taking better care of myself, and we'll find a balance that works for both of us." Jamal leaned in and hugged his mother gently, careful of the IV lines. "I love you, Mom," he whispered. "I love you too, baby," Angela replied, holding her son close. "More than you'll ever know." As Angela and Jamal stepped through the front door of their home, a wave of emotion washed over them both. The house felt different now, as if the walls themselves held a new understanding of the precious life they sheltered. "Welcome home, Mom," Jamal said softly, his arm supporting Angela as they walked inside. Angela took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scent of home. "It's good to be back," she replied, her voice filled with gratitude. Jamal guided his mother to the living room couch, helping her sit down gently. "Let me get you settled," he said, his eyes scanning the room for anything she might need. Angela watched her son with a mixture of pride and love. "Jamal, honey, you don't have to fuss over me," she said, but her words held no real protest. "I want to, Mom," Jamal insisted, arranging pillows behind her back and draping a soft blanket over her legs. "You've always taken care of me. Now it's my turn to help you." As Jamal bustled around the room, making sure everything was just right, Angela felt a lump form in her throat. She realized how much she had underestimated her son's strength and maturity. Once he was satisfied that Angela was comfortable, Jamal sat down beside her. "Mom," he began, his voice serious, "we need to talk about how things are going to be different now." Angela nodded, reaching out to take her son's hand. "You're right, sweetie. Things do need to change." "I want to help more around the house," Jamal said, his eyes meeting his mother's. "And maybe you could work less? I know we need the money, but your health is more important." Angela felt tears prick at her eyes. "Oh, Jamal," she whispered, "you're so thoughtful. Yes, I think that's a good idea. I promise I'll start taking better care of myself." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both contemplating the changes ahead. Then Angela spoke again, her voice filled with determination. "We'll figure this out together, honey. I'll talk to my boss about reducing my hours and we can make a plan for sharing the housework." Jamal nodded eagerly. "And I can help with the grocery shopping and cooking sometimes too," he added. "I want to learn how to make healthy meals for both of us." Angela smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "That sounds wonderful, Jamal. We'll support each other, every step of the way." As they continued to talk, making plans and sharing ideas, the house seemed to come alive around them. It was no longer just a place they lived, but a home filled with love, understanding, and a newfound appreciation for each other. As the days passed, word of Angela's situation began to spread through the neighborhood like a gentle breeze. What started as a whisper between concerned neighbors soon grew into a chorus of support and compassion. One sunny afternoon, as Angela was resting on the porch, she noticed Mrs. Thompson from across the street approaching with a covered dish in her hands. The elderly woman's face was etched with concern as she climbed the steps. "Angela, dear," Mrs. Thompson called out, "I heard about what happened. I've brought you a casserole." Angela's eyes widened in surprise. She and Mrs. Thompson had exchanged polite waves over the years, but they'd never really talked. "That's so kind of you," she said, genuinely touched. As Mrs. Thompson set the dish down, she patted Angela's hand. "We're here for you, dear. Don't you hesitate to ask if you need anything." Before Angela could fully process this unexpected kindness, she spotted Mr. Rodriguez, the owner of the local grocery store, walking up her driveway. In his arms, he carried a bag full of fresh fruits and vegetables. "Ms. Angela," he called out with a warm smile, "I brought you some healthy goodies. On the house, of course." Angela felt her eyes well up with tears. "Mr. Rodriguez, I don't know what to say." He waved off her thanks. "It's what neighbors do. We look out for each other." Throughout the week, more neighbors stopped by. Some brought food, others offered to mow the lawn or help with household chores. The Patel family from next door even offered to tutor Jamal in math so Angela wouldn't have to worry about his studies. Each act of kindness left Angela overwhelmed with gratitude. She had always seen herself as the caregiver, the one who helped others. Accepting help felt strange at first, but as the days went by, she began to understand the beauty of community support. One evening, as Angela and Jamal sat on the porch swing watching the sunset, she turned to her son with tears in her eyes. "You know, Jamal," she said softly, "I've always thought I had to do everything on my own. But these past few days have shown me that it's okay to lean on others sometimes." Jamal nodded, squeezing his mother's hand. "We're not alone, Mom. We've got a whole neighborhood behind us." Angela smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She realized that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, but a way to strengthen the bonds of community. As the sky turned a soft pink, Angela made a silent promise to herself to be more open to receiving help and to pay forward the kindness she had been shown. As the days turned into weeks, Angela began to make significant changes to her daily routine. She realized that taking care of herself wasn't selfish. It was necessary for both her and Jamal's well-being. One sunny morning, Angela woke up earlier than usual. Instead of rushing to make breakfast, she put on her sneakers and went for a short walk around the block. The crisp morning air filled her lungs, and she felt a sense of calm wash over her. When she returned home, Jamal was already up, preparing a simple breakfast of oatmeal and fruit. "Good morning, Mom," Jamal said with a smile. "How was your walk?" Angela's face lit up. "It was wonderful, sweetie. I feel so refreshed." As they sat down to eat, Angela noticed the change in their morning routine. There was no rush, no stress. They talked and laughed, enjoying each other's company. Before leaving for work, Angela packed a healthy lunch and promised Jamal she'd take regular breaks throughout her shift. At the hospital, Angela's colleagues noticed the change in her demeanor. She seemed more relaxed, more focused. During her lunch break, instead of working through it as she used to, Angela went outside to eat her packed lunch in the hospital garden. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, and took a few deep breaths. When she returned home that evening, Jamal was waiting for her with a surprise. He had prepared a simple dinner and set up a cozy corner in the living room with cushions and soft blankets. "I thought we could have a relaxing evening together," Jamal said, his eyes shining with pride. Angela felt her heart swell with love. "That sounds perfect, honey." As they sat together, enjoying their meal in each other's company, Angela realized how much better she felt. She had more energy, felt less stressed, and most importantly, she was present in the moment with her son. "You know, Jamal," Angela said softly, "I'm so grateful for your support. You've been reminding me every day how important it is to take care of myself." Jamal smiled, reaching out to hold his mother's hand. "We're in this together, Mom. Your health and happiness matter to me, just as much as mine matter to you." As the weeks passed, Jamal became more involved in helping around the house. He took on additional chores like doing the laundry and preparing simple meals. This not only eased Angela's workload, but also gave Jamal a sense of purpose and responsibility. One day, while helping Angela fold clothes, Jamal had an idea. "Mom," he said, his eyes bright with excitement, "I've been thinking about how many other kids might be in the same situation as us." Angela paused, a shirt in her hands. "What do you mean, sweetie?" Jamal explained, "Well, I can't be the only kid with a parent who works really hard. Maybe I could start a group at school for kids like me?" Angela smiled, touched by her son's thoughtfulness. "That's a wonderful idea, Jamal. I'm sure there are many children who could use that kind of support." Encouraged by his mother's approval, Jamal approached his school counselor the next day. With her help, he set up a small support group for students whose parents were overworked. The first meeting was held in a quiet classroom after school. Jamal was nervous as he watched 5 other students file in, their faces a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. "Hi, everyone," Jamal began, his voice a little shaky. "I'm Jamal, and I started this group because my mom works really hard, sometimes too hard. I thought maybe we could share our experiences and come up with ways to help our families." As the students began to open up, Jamal felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He wasn't alone. Each story resonated with him, from Sarah, whose single dad worked 2 jobs, to Miguel, whose parents ran a small business. They shared ideas for helping at home, like creating chore charts and learning to cook simple meals. Jamal talked about the importance of encouraging their parents to take breaks and prioritize self-care. "My mom started going for morning walks," Jamal shared. "It's made a big difference in her mood and energy." The group nodded, some jotting down notes. As the meeting came to a close, Jamal felt a sense of accomplishment. He had created a space where kids like him could find support and understanding. Walking home that day, Jamal felt lighter. He had found comfort in knowing he wasn't alone in his experiences, and he was making a difference, not just for his mom, but for other families too. Inspired by her recovery and the outpouring of support she had received, Angela felt a deep desire to give back to her community. She couldn't shake the feeling that there were others out there, just like her, who were pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion without realizing the consequences. One evening, as she and Jamal sat at the kitchen table finishing dinner, Angela shared her idea. "I've been thinking," she began, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm, "about organizing some wellness workshops for our neighbors." Jamal looked up from his plate, intrigued. "What kind of workshops, Mom?" Angela smiled warmly. "Well, I want to teach people about the importance of self-care and how to spot the signs of burnout before it's too late. I don't want anyone else to go through what we did." With Jamal's enthusiastic support, Angela set to work planning her first workshop. She reached out to local community centers and eventually secured a small meeting room at the neighborhood library. Angela spent her evenings researching and preparing, pouring her heart into creating a program that would truly help others. The day of the first workshop arrived, and Angela felt a mix of nervousness and excitement as she set up the room. To her surprise and delight, more people showed up than she had expected. As she began to speak, sharing her own story and the lessons she had learned, Angela could see her words resonating with the attendees. One participant, a young mother named Maria, raised her hand. "How do you find time for self-care when there's always so much to do?" she asked, her voice tinged with frustration. Angela nodded understandingly. "It's not easy," she admitted, "but we have to remember that taking care of ourselves isn't selfish. It's necessary. Start small, even if it's just 5 minutes a day to do something you enjoy." As the workshop progressed, Angela could see the impact her words were having. People were nodding, taking notes, and sharing their own experiences. By the end of the session, there was a palpable sense of hope and determination in the room. The workshops quickly gained popularity, with more and more people signing up for each session. Angela found herself expanding the program, covering topics like stress management, healthy eating on a budget, and the importance of sleep. As word of Angela's workshop spread, the community began to realize the importance of looking out for one another. Inspired by Angela's story and the lessons she shared, a group of neighbors came together to establish the Helping Hands program. The program's goal was simple yet powerful: to create a network of support where no one would have to struggle alone. Neighbors began checking in on each other regularly, offering help with tasks like grocery shopping, yard work, or simply providing a listening ear. Sarah, the young mother who had attended Angela's first workshop, became one of the program's most enthusiastic supporters. She organized a schedule for meal deliveries to families going through tough times. "It's amazing how a home-cooked meal can lift someone's spirits," she said with a warm smile. The Helping Hands program also included regular educational sessions. These covered a range of topics, from stress management techniques to tips for healthy living on a budget. Local experts volunteered their time to lead these sessions, sharing their knowledge with the community. One particularly popular session focused on the importance of sleep. Dr. Thompson, a local sleep specialist, explained, "Getting enough rest is crucial for our physical and mental health. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity." As the program grew, so did the sense of connection within the community. People who had once been strangers now greeted each other by name on the streets. The atmosphere in the neighborhood changed, becoming warmer and more supportive. Angela watched with pride as the community embraced the spirit of mutual support. She often thought back to her own experience and how different things might have been if such a program had existed then. "It's not just about preventing burnout," she reflected. "It's about building a community where everyone feels valued and supported." The impact of the Helping Hands program extended beyond individual well-being. As neighbors looked out for each other, the overall health of the community improved. People reported feeling less stressed, more connected, and better equipped to handle life's challenges. As the weeks passed, Angela's life began to transform in ways she never thought possible. The lessons she learned from her ordeal and the support of the community helped her find a better balance between her work and personal life. She no longer pushed herself to the brink of exhaustion, instead learning to prioritize her own well-being alongside her responsibilities. Angela started taking regular breaks during her shifts at the hospital, using those moments to recharge and refocus. She also made a point of eating nutritious meals and getting enough sleep each night. These small changes made a big difference in her energy levels and overall mood. The most significant improvement, however, was in Angela's relationship with Jamal. Their bond, already strong, had been tested by their shared experience and emerged even stronger. Angela realized that being present for her son was just as important as providing for him financially. She began attending Jamal's school events, cheering him on from the sidelines during his soccer games and beaming with pride at his science fair presentations. These moments, once rare treats, became regular occurrences that both Angela and Jamal cherished. Their evenings at home took on a new rhythm. Instead of Angela collapsing on the couch, exhausted from her long shifts, they now spent quality time together. They cooked meals side by side, laughing as they experimented with new recipes. They played board games, each trying to outdo the other in friendly competition. Sometimes they simply sat together, talking about their days and sharing their thoughts and dreams. Jamal felt the change deeply. He no longer worried constantly about his mother's health or felt the heavy weight of responsibility on his young shoulders. Instead, he felt secure and supported, knowing that Angela was there for him not just in body but in spirit as well. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Jamal looked up at his mother. Her face, once drawn with fatigue, now glowed with contentment. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm really glad you're okay, and I'm happy we get to spend more time together." Angela wrapped her arm around Jamal's shoulders, pulling him close. "Me too, sweetheart," she replied, her voice filled with emotion. "I'm sorry it took such a scare for me to realize what's truly important, but I promise you, I'll always be here for you." As the sun rose on a beautiful Saturday morning, the community gathered at the hospital's auditorium. The room buzzed with excitement and warmth as neighbors, friends, and hospital staff filled the seats. At the front of the room stood Angela and Jamal, their faces beaming with gratitude and newfound strength. Angela stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady and full of emotion. "Thank you all for coming today," she began. "A few months ago, I thought I had to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders alone. I pushed myself to the brink, thinking that was what it meant to be a good mother and nurse. But I was wrong." She paused, looking at Jamal with tears in her eyes. "My son's bravery and love saved my life. And all of you, with your kindness and support, helped us heal and grow stronger." Angela went on to share her story, detailing the dangers of overwork and the importance of self-care. She spoke of the lessons she had learned and how they had transformed her life and her relationship with Jamal. "We don't have to face our struggles alone," Angela said, her voice filled with conviction. "We have each other. Let's promise to look out for one another, to offer help when we can, and to ask for it when we need it." The audience nodded in agreement, many wiping away tears. As Angela finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. Jamal stood up and joined his mother, wrapping his arms around her in a tight hug. The hospital administrator then took the stage, praising Jamal for his quick thinking and bravery.